Hello everyone, I'm Kasey Wiedrich and I'm the Director of Applied Research with Prosperity Now, and we're here today to discuss the release of the new Prosperity Now Scorecard and local data that we've updated for 2018. And with me is our board member, Sherry Salway-Black. She's been working with Native communities for over 40 years and is a member of the Oglala Lakota Nation. So welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and this is so exciting.
Thank you. And so today, again, we're talking about the fact that we've added new data to the scorecard for tribal areas within the United States. And we've added roughly 17 measures of financial health, including income, income poverty, education, access to health insurance, home ownership, to the scorecard. And for that, we've included tribal areas that have 1,000 households, and we've taken a really broad definition of tribal areas from the Census Bureau. So we are including federally recognized Indian reservations, state recognized Indian reservations, also statistical areas, tribal designated statistical areas, Hawaiian homelands, and Alaska Native villages. And there are some tribal areas that don't meet the threshold of 1,000 households, but we still wanted those smaller communities to be represented, so that we did aggregate, sort of combining the data for these small tribal areas for 22 states, and you can find those in the scorecard as well. In addition to adding the data for the tribal areas to the scorecard, we've also included more data for Native Americans and Native Hawaiians to the scorecard local data as a whole. So now, for example, if you're interested in what Native American homeownership in Rapid City, South Dakota is compared to other populations in Rapid City, you can now go online and find a chart of that as well. So that's just a brief introduction to the data that we've uploaded, but Sherry, really, as our board member, was the greatest champion for us adding this to the scorecard and really introduced us to the partners that made this data possible. So Sherry, can you speak to why you thought this was important and why this kind of data is important for Native communities?
Native people have always collected data. In time immemorial, they've collected data and used it appropriately to survive, to thrive in their communities. They're a very place-based people. And in this century, one of the things that has become common usage is to say we're the asterisk nation, in essence, where you always see Asian population, white population, African American, Hispanic, but you see other, and we're always included in the other because we are a small population. But the Prosperity Now Scorecard, I think, was really a key opportunity to look at, can we in fact look at data from this population, from Native peoples in the United States, even given the small numbers relative.
Yeah.
There are places where Native people are a significant part of the population, and why couldn't we include data about them? And it is, having data about yourself is so important for planning purposes, for recognizing issues that are coming up. So that's really why, for planning your economic futures, for looking at where you want to build houses. So it's very much an important part for any population group, and we have always been excluded from some of the big databases that there are. So this is great that Prosperity Now is doing this.
Yeah, and we also, we're at fault for including Native Americans as other in the local data, so we are also excited to correct that and to add more data for Native Americans, but still want to point out that while we're adding this data, there are still limitations to what we're able to add, and there's a number of the measures, say around business ownership, which would be really important for Native communities. We're still lacking some of that data for a lot of these tribal areas, so there's still more that we as Prosperity Now and our partners have to do to get more data to represent Native communities.
But you're making a start, and I think that's what's important, and bringing in, NCAI, the Policy Research Center, Center for Indian Country Development, and looking at partnerships is so important to be able to move us forward in this, so we are getting the data.
Yeah, no, we're really excited to do it. So now I want to turn to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes that we saw. And we released a brief with the new local data that looked at, again, just sort of at a high level nationally, some of the outcomes on tribal areas versus the United States as a whole. And we really do see on tribal lands, and particularly for Indian and Native communities on tribal lands, much higher levels of financial insecurity. And for example, we saw that 18% of families on tribal lands and 28% of Native American families on tribal lands are living in income poverty versus, it's 11% of families in the United States. So can you really talk to what you see are some of the greatest economic challenges facing tribal communities?
Sure. How much time do we have? Well, one would be the fact that tribes are governments, just as local counties have governments, states have governments, and the federal government. And a lot of times policymakers don't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
And they exclude tribal governments from legislation that will help them with economic development.
Mm-hmm.
For example, taxation. So that's one where tribes, are just now really beginning to be able to use taxing powers that other local state governments can be. And your tax base really determines whether or not you will have infrastructure. There's also the issue of control. Tribal governments really have dealt historically with the federal government, and the federal government has exercised quite a bit of control over tribal economies.
Mm.
And it is so much better when tribes exert that control, when they control, the economic development engine that their communities can be. Another one is access to capital and credit. Historically, as other poor communities have shown, banks do not service poor communities, and so therefore the business community has not had access to capital and credit. So you see, or for housing as well too, for mortgages. Also, and it's way too complicated to get in, but the status of the land is a key factor in terms of the ownership of the land, and it's that control issue again of can tribes control this and actually use the land in a way that will allow for appropriate development, environmental protection, housing kinds of things. So it's very much a mix of complex factors as to why, but I believe that things are turning around in the sense of tribes gaining control, really doing some exciting kinds of economic development. And I would imagine by looking at data as this is, that it will show that turnaround over time. We've already been seeing it over the last I'd say 20 years, where in some communities, it's not across the board, but in some communities there is very positive economic change.
Yeah. So speaking of, what tribal governments can do with data, we really do put the scorecard out so that people don't just sort of see the data, but so that they are moved to act. Mm-hmm. So can you give any suggestions for how you think either advocates or practitioners or even the tribal governments can use data like we're putting on the scorecard?
Well, one obvious way to use the data is for resources. At a local level, at a state level, at a federal level. It's, figures, population figures or whatever, determine federal resources in many ways. And in addition, tribes and states have not historically worked together, and oftentimes legislation that in fact should include tribes as people who live in the state doesn't include them, because again the state legislators don't know about the data from tribes. So resources is a very, very big part of that, and tribal governments themselves having the data for that, and community members to be able to work with tribal government, work with state government, to be able to really look at what will work for us, and what do we need to know about our communities is so very important.
Yeah. So, for people or organizations in the Prosperity Now community who aren't currently working with tribes or the Native communities in their state. Can you give suggestions for how they could do some outreach, how they could form new partnerships?
Again, it's something that takes time.
Yeah.
I think is one very critical part of this. But with partners that are willing to go the distance with tribes, it's not a quick and easy fix.
Yeah.
You know, as you shared earlier, I've been working at this for 40 years, or, you know, I stand on the shoulders of so many others who are working on this and so many more to come. And we look for partners who are willing to commit the time and the effort and to understand the Native community. It's not at all like other communities.
Yeah.
The legalities, the history is different. Therefore, learning and being willing to understand the issues, I think, is so important. And knowing that you're there for the long term, I think, is really important. And as I mentioned before, you know, there's been this, because of the federal tribal relationship over time, many groups, say at a state level, state government or whatever, haven't really worked with tribes, and tribes haven't worked with state governments. And breaking down those barriers is such an important thing to do, and to be willing for tribes to understand state government, for state government to understand tribes, and for organizations as well to really spend the time communicating with each other. So to really to understand the different cultures that we come from is really important.
Great. And, you know, and with that, I do want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you for encouraging us to add this data to the scorecard. We're really excited about it. And I do want to also thank our partners, as we said, with NCAI, Yvette and Amber, and Dick Todd with the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. And for more information and to find the data for your tribal communities, please visit us at www.scorecard.prosperitynow.org. And for any questions, you can reach out to us at scorecard@prosperitynow.org. Thank you very much. To find the tribal area data in the scorecard, from the homepage, click Data by Location. This will take you to our interactive map. This map defaults to states, but you select here to show a different area. We'll select tribal areas. Then you can scroll through to see the data for any specific tribal area. To pick a specific area to find more information, you can either click on the map, or you can type into the search bar. And once it comes up into the menu, use the mouse to select it. That will take you through to our detailed page, at which you can find all of the data for the specific tribal area. You click here to see the data within the different issue areas. If there's data available by race, you can select here to see a chart of the data broken out by race. You can also download this chart if you'd like to use it in presentations or reports. When you scroll back up to the top, you can also find demographic information for this community. And you can also download a PDF that contains all of the information and all of the data we have for any one location. Close in here. If you want to select another place, you simply close here, and it will take you back to the map. You can find more information on tribal areas if you go to the Data by Issue section of the site. This is the section of the site that will show you the specifics for any one measure, data for more than one places at one time. So you start by selecting your issue area, select the type of measure you'd like to see. Tribal areas are one of our local outcome measures. Select home ownership rate or any of the other measures you're interested in. Scroll down past the data definition and the source, and you come to a selection menu that lets you choose the geography you'd like to see. From the top, you select tribal areas, choose the state that we're interested in seeing. We will select Minnesota. Click Apply. And below you will populate a table of all the tribal areas that we've included for Minnesota. If the data is available by race, you can click here to see a table for all of the tribal areas and the data broken out by race. For more information on the tribal area data in the scorecard, you can go to the About Methodology section of the site.
If you look at the local outcome data, scroll down and you can find the information on tribal areas, which specific types of geographies we included in the scorecard, as well as a link to information on the individual tribal areas we included within our aggregate small tribal areas data. You can also visit the reports menu to create other reports. You can here also download that report that has all of the data for your location and create other charts by race. We hope that you find the scorecard information helpful. If you have any questions, please contact us at scorecard@prosperitynow.org. Thank you and have a good day.